Hi, and welcome to our third session of Women in the Bible study with me, Vicar Courtney. We're so glad that you're here. Really excited about this project that we've been doing. If this is your first time tuning in, we'll be talking about Ruth today, and feel free to check out the previous videos of Hagar and Deborah. And we'll have one more video coming out in 2 weeks. So to set the scene a little bit for the book of Ruth, she gets her own book, which is kind of cool. Ruth happens as a bridge between the period of Judges that we just talked about with the story of Deborah and the reign of King David, so Israel's first king. Story of Ruth happens sometime between the two of those. One of the things that we're going to see throughout this story, and we'll talk about, are the Moabites versus the Israelites. The Moabites were despised by the Israelites. They were considered unclean and immoral and dangerous. There's biblical evidence. Deuteronomy forbids Moabites from entering Israel's religious assemblies. Ezra and Nehemiah end up instituting laws against foreign marriages, especially to Moabites. And we also see in Numbers and First Kings that Moabites are seen as women who have the power to seduce Israelites away from God. So this tension is a really big deal in the Hebrew scriptures. And it's also going to be really important throughout this book of Ruth, and we'll get a little bit more into that. The book of Ruth is also seen potentially as a response or a protest to these laws against foreign marriage, stated especially in Ezra and Nehemiah. It was potentially written with hope to inspire and encourage people to be more open and welcoming of non-Israelites, of foreign people. This is the only book in the Bible that is named for a foreign woman, which is exciting. We only have one other book specifically named after a woman, and that is the book of Esther. So the book of Ruth, it has a lot of different themes at play. We'll see gender, ethnicity, and otherness. And we'll also see a movement from emptiness into fullness. So if you have not read the book of Ruth, it's 4 chapters, it's not too long. Feel free to stop here and go read it, or I'll give you a quick little overview. Also, if you don't want to read the whole thing, the biggest part really happens in chapter 3. You can also download the worksheet for more on that. So, Ruth chapter 1. Ooh, sorry. There we go. My video is covering things. Ruth chapter 1. We see the story of Elimelech and Naomi. They have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, who are fleeing the famine in Israel. And they're going into this Moabite territory in search of a better life in this foreign land where there's tensions between Israel and Moab. So that's really important in setting the scene, that they felt it was safer in a land of war than in the land where there was famine. Life in Moab was not awesome. It was fruitful in the fact that Mahlon and Chilion got married to Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. However, Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion all ended up dying. And there's thought that the death of these men came about from the tensions between the Israelites and the Moabites, which would make sense. So now we see Naomi is left with her 2 daughters-in-law. She gives them the option to return to their families. She says, I want to return to my home in Judah to die. Go back to your families, restart your life, try again. Orpah returns to her family. She says, thanks, bye. And Ruth says, no, please let me stay with you. So Ruth and Naomi journey to Bethlehem. chapter 2. Ruth and Naomi arrive in Bethlehem, and immediately they have a life of poverty. They have nothing. Everyone else who had survived the famine was suddenly flourishing in their life, and here comes Ruth and Naomi. Naomi, who is just wallowing in the sorrow of losing her husband and her 2 sons. Ruth takes up she puts on what she needs to, and she says, I'm going to go glean in the fields. It's harvest season, which means that I can pick up the scraps that aren't harvested. And that will at least give us something to eat. She ends up in the field of Boaz, who notices her, and he blesses her for her work after hearing her story, for her love and her care of Naomi. And he looks past her identity as a foreigner, and he actually tells his workers to give her a little bit of food, and Boaz tells Ruth to stay with his female servants so that she is a little bit of safety. Chapter 3 is where things really start to get interesting. Ruth tells Naomi, I've been working in this field of Boaz, and Naomi says, oh, hey, he's family. We need to do something. So one important thing, gleaning was only a temporary solution to their hunger because it happened in the harvest season. So Naomi says, harvest is going to end and we need some security going forward. So Naomi plots for Ruth to end up with Boaz. She says, go into his room at night, lie down at his feet, and have a conversation with him and wait for him to tell you what to do. This was bold and dangerous. Naomi is putting Ruth at great risk by sending her out alone at night and is opening Ruth up sexually to Boaz. It's bold, but it could have backfired. It is a reminder to us that there are women who go to great lengths to take care of their families and to take care of themselves, and that often is through offering up their body. So Ruth goes in, lays at Boaz's feet. Boaz wakes up and he's like, whoa, what happened? I drank a little too much last night. What happened that I don't remember? Ruth basically proposes marriage to him. She says, yeah, you're next of kin and I need safety. So how are we going to make this work? This is really fun. I mean, I think it's so cool that a woman is proposing marriage to a man and basically taking it upon herself to ensure her safety and security. So Boaz is like, okay, this is a big deal. Like, you've gone to great lengths to take care of Naomi, to come here today to, put yourself at risk to talk to me. So Boaz says, I think there's another next of kin. Let me go talk to them, see if they'll marry you, and we'll get this worked out. I promise to take care of you. What I think is amazing is Boaz is next of kin to Naomi, and so by extension Ruth, but indirectly. And because of her status as a foreigner, Boaz could have said no. But he doesn't let ethnic or economic barriers get in the way. So chapter 4, the story starts to come to a conclusion. Boaz confronts the elders. He confronts this next of kin, and he says, we need to take care of them. It's our family responsibility. The other man says, no, not my problem. And so Boaz takes Ruth as his wife, thus ensuring her safety and well-being, but also the safety and well-being of Naomi. The elders at this point in the story proclaim a blessing. The community then blesses this union, which is interesting because when Ruth and Naomi had first returned to Bethlehem, the community, which could be seen, especially the community of women, as kind of a fourth female character in the story, they were kind of mean to Naomi. And so now all of a sudden they're proclaiming blessings and joy and happiness. Ruth and Boaz have a son named Obed. Obed will not only ensure the lineage of Naomi and Ruth and their family, but Obed specifically will go on to be the father of Jesse, who then in turn is the father of David, the first king of Israel. The chapter ends with that lineage of King David. But one further thing that's interesting looking forward, we see Ruth and we see Obed again in the story of Jesus, when in Matthew, the lineage of Jesus is named out, and Ruth is named, which is really kind of cool. In a patriarchal society, Ruth was included. So a few notes on Ruth. Ruth's first words as an independent character, besides just, we open with Naomi, then we see Orpah and Ruth. And Ruth, her first words are words of solidarity and loyalty with Naomi and to this other woman. She says, no, I won't return to my family. I want to stay with you. Ruth is fiercely committed not only to her husband, but by extension to Naomi, her mother-in-law. She could have left, and she opted to stay. So marriage custom in that time dictated that a woman left her family of origin, and she completely would have joined the new Jewish family. And so Ruth refused to depart from that marriage vow. She said, no, I will stay and I will take care of you, Naomi. Orpah, her other daughter-in-law, she takes off. But Ruth is filled with this God's sacred kindness to say, no, it doesn't matter about my future. I need to take care of you. Another interesting element in this is that a mother-daughter-in-law relationship is not one that's very common. Often there tends to be tension and rivalry among these women, but Ruth does not let that be the case. Even though Ruth comes from an enemy people, Boaz realizes that she is worthy and loyal. Ruth was surprised that Boaz even noticed her among all of the poor women. Not only was she poor and gleaning, but she was also a foreigner. And so she never dreamed that Boaz would give her the time of day. One interesting thing is that nowhere does she ever try to hide her ethnicity to appear as an Israelite. She embraces who she is and she just lets that be. Boaz took her vulnerability and he called her family instead of foreigner. The rest of the community seemed really not okay with the fact that she was a Moabite, and Boaz never really seemed to mention it. Ruth's bold actions toward Boaz could have backfired. She could have been raped. She could have been scorned and despised. She could have ruined her reputation and been seen as scandalous. But instead, Boaz, his compassion and kindness towards Ruth were what was the most important. He wasn't worried about ruining her reputation, but no, your family, of course I will take care of you. An interesting thing about Boaz, his mother was Rahab, who was another important woman in the Bible, known for being a hero and for a poor prostitute. So this story, he is an important character and he may have had a different understanding and welcome and love of people that really helped Ruth out. Even after enduring widowhood and poverty and suffering, Ruth got her new start and she built a family that ultimately changed the world. So she's pretty awesome. A few notes on Naomi. She welcomed the opportunity for a multicultural family. She could have told her sons, no, you have to find Israelite women, but instead she's like, okay, when in Moab, marry a Moabite. She wanted to send them away, but she allowed Ruth to stay with her. She could have said, no, I don't want you in my family. And instead, she allowed Ruth to accompany her. Naomi, is also a woman of deep faith and great conflict. She was married and blessed with children, but her lineage died with the death of her husband and her sons. She returned home to Bethlehem saying, "I am not worthy. I have been stripped of everything that gave my life meaning and security." But she only dwells in that sorrow for a little bit. She ends up being strategic and stubborn, and in a funny way, ultimately playing matchmaker to help Ruth and Boaz get together, thus guaranteeing the safety of herself and of Ruth. And because we've got an extra woman in the story, we're going to talk a little bit about Orpah. Nowhere in the story is Orpah judged for leaving Naomi. That is really, really important. Naomi gave Orpah a way out, and it's okay to take it. Orpah took care of herself. She probably went on, got married, and had a family, and that is okay. Some people see Orpah for her strength and independence, refusing to live sacrificially to take care of Naomi, and instead paving a way for her own future and her own family. So even though we don't see much of Orpah, she's really pretty awesome. One thing that I won't spend terribly too much time on, but a huge theme in this story is economic survival and family values. And there's a whole chapter devoted to this in this book called Just Wives. And this quote says, "What is bold and extremely important about this story is that the women take the matter into their own hands to devise a plan to change their status. It just happens to be through a man." This idea of economic survival literally drives the plot. These two women are acting on their own, making decisions and taking initiative and cooperating with one another for their survival. They were seen as the poorest of the poor as gleaners, as it was only a temporary kind of fix for their hunger. And it's also important to remember that in this time period, marriage was largely the only way to escape an economically marginalized life. And while we are fortunate enough, if you're watching and you live in the United States, we live in a country where we can change our economic status by ourselves with hard work and determination and various other opportunities. There are still places, many places in the world, where marriage is the only way to change your economic status. So there's a lot of what might feel like old kind of traditions to us that are still very alive and true in parts of the country and parts of the world. Ruth's story is one of hope and happiness. It's kind of like Cinderella. She goes from nothing to marrying the most important man in the city. And it's important to remember that this is a glorious and a wonderful story of strength for women that we hope gives hope, but that this is not always the case for women around the world. They don't always have the opportunity to change their economic situation. And that's just really important. So a few lessons from Ruth. It can be beneficial to listen to our elders. I'm sure those of you with grandchildren are really excited to hear that. There is a wisdom that comes with age, and Ruth and Naomi working together would not have been possible if Ruth hadn't listened. Another important thing we learn from Ruth is that sacred kindness is a gift to others. Also, that faith, hard work, obedience, and kindness can bring good fortune. And it's important to embrace your identity and don't hide who you truly are. Live into whatever defines you, whatever makes you you, and let that grow and let that be. Few lessons from Naomi. Stubbornness can be a sign of strength. Even when we are feeling or thinking or convinced that God has abandoned us, We should always have hope because God is always there. God is not an active, named player in the story, but we can see God at work through the community and the people and the way that they care for one another. We also learn from Naomi that sometimes our family or our children aren't the ones related to us by blood. And what I think is really important that Naomi teaches us is that love and acceptance of those different from us isn't always easy, but it is necessary for all of our survival. She hadn't welcomed Ruth into her family, she would have died alone. Given what is going on in our world today, at the beginning of June in 2020, we're seeing people not loving and accepting each other for their differences. And it's literally bringing about the death of people, specifically people of color. So we can learn from Naomi that an open mind and an open heart is literally necessary for all of our survival. And a few lessons from Orpah. Going back is not always an option. If it is one that works for you, then go for it. It is okay to think about yourself and your own future. If you have that option and you want to take it, go for it. We also learn that God is walking beside us through all of our decision making, especially when it is hard or difficult. We don't know what that decision was like for Orpah, but we are often called to make difficult decisions in our lives, and God is always there with us. So in conclusion, Ruth is a really wonderful story. Today we highlighted Ruth, Naomi, a little bit of Orpah. We could also have spent tons of time talking about the women in the community and the way they influenced the story. We could have spent even more time talking about economic values and family values. I encourage you, read the story, download the worksheet if you want to go a little bit deeper. And thank you for joining us on this journey. The story of Ruth has been a lot of fun, and a lot of eye-opening moments have been had in my own study as I learn to uncover and uplift the ways that these women are working for their own survival. So thank you for joining us. We will be having a meeting to discuss the video. It's coming up next week on Tuesday, June 9th at 3:30 in the afternoon on Zoom. As always, please email me with questions, comments, concerns. I love to hear your feedback. And if you can join us on Tuesday, I look forward to seeing you then. Have a great day.